This is Rudo Radio coming to you from the 559.
Hello and welcome to Rudo Radio, SB Nation and Cage Side Seats weekly wrestling podcast. I am Nick Bond, joined as ever by Mr. Mark Normandin. Mark, how are you?
I'm doing well today. And it's because we have a special guest.
Woo, yay!
Yeah, I didn't think of anything else to say, so we're just going to skip straight to introducing.
Is it me?
Oh man, it is.
Oh,
Good
wow.
guess.
Awesome. Thank you.
It is David Roth of Vice Sports, formerly The Classical. How are you, David?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. David and I have known each other for a couple of years because of The Classical, and Mark and David have known each other for a couple of years because of SB Nation. You are not a wrestling fan per se, but because of me and a bunch of other people, you have been exposed to an almost unconscionable amount of wrestling. Is that fair to say?
I would certainly say that it is almost unconscionable, and I would certainly say that I've been exposed to it. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's like if you got really into movies only by reading reviews of movies.
That's exactly what I thought of.
And also, you'd never seen a movie, really. Like, you'd only seen, like, a few minutes of it.
Like, you're not sure how films work in terms of their construction, but you're like, oh, something happens.
Yeah,
it's great.
I'm like, oh, that's John Cusack. Like, I'm aware of who he is. I even have opinions on John Cusack. I just have only heard him say, like, 10 words.
All on Twitter, right? It's just the mad rantings of an 80s movie star.
It's like everything I've ever heard him say is about gluten.
So we wanted to start quickly because Mark and I had a hot debate last week on it about, I think so, we spent about 25 minutes talking about it, on the women's Money in the Bank match and the subsequent rematch, which happened on Tuesday, which was excellent and part of a pretty good suite of shows. I believe tonight, we record this on Wednesday, tonight is the last woman standing match between Asuka and Nikki Cross. So it'll be 3 straight nights with women main eventing the show.
Yeah, men and women are equal now.
Yeah,
they have
totally.
3 shows, so it's solved.
Wait, does that mean that we can redo the 2016 election, or is that...
I already am getting screamed at by a lot of people for politics today, so...
Well, I mean, you did write something that was about Joe Madden, and he is a hot button issue.
He sucks.
Did you were upset with his conciliatory, at least we are not all in re-education camps outside Pyongyang message about meeting the president?
Yeah, I thought it was, like, if he wants to say some bullshit thing and go visit again, or just be like, I have to do it, or my bosses will fire me, or just like, yeah, the Ricketts are good with them, that's cool. Whatever, but his, like, this isn't a political statement. However, not visiting the White House is definitely a political statement. It's like, Joe, shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Joe Madden, I had long loved Joe Madden, and Mark, because Mark has really bad taste in things, like, he hates Final Fantasy VII.
I don't hate it, it's just not anywhere near as good as you think it is.
Oh my god. And other things that are escaping me right now.
Marvel's better than DC. The Simpsons are
God.
good. David, are The Simpsons good?
They were good.
Yeah. Nick doesn't believe there was ever a time where they were any good.
Well, this is the thing with young people, right? I mean, he would have been like 8 years old when it was good.
Well, and here's the other thing. I don't find abusive parents funny at all, so it was very hard for me to be like, ha ha, he's choking his son to death. So I don't know if that's just me.
I have honestly never heard that angle on it. I completely understand and I honor your perspective, but...
It's so weird, because it's like, I didn't realize it, and then there's an episode where he's choking his son, and I'm like, oh, that's what it is. That's why I don't like this show. So yeah, Mark, what were we talking about? You didn't like something in there.
The important thing is that Joe Madden sucks.
Yes, that's what it was. I realized today that Joe Madden sucks.
Sooner or later, we're all going to wind up agreeing with Davey Johnson on Joe Madden. That's like part of getting older. We're going to see him as the weird wuss that Dave Johnson was called him.
Yeah, that's the most accurate description I've ever heard for anyone ever. So, Mark, what did you think of it? What did you think of the women's Money in the Bank match?
David, do you know like the background of all this?
Broadly speaking, I think I do. I mean, I know what the Money in the Bank match is, and you said Sasha Banks is a part of this?
Not this time. This time it was, Carmella. Carmella was the, she is from the Jersey Shore, at least plays someone from the Jersey Shore, and she has...
Long Island?
Oh, same thing.
No, man. No, it's not.
I'm from Long Island. It's the same thing.
I'm from New Jersey, and I really insist that it is not. But look, we're not going to get anywhere with this. Although two guys from New Jersey and Long Island being like, no, is a pretty good example of why people hate.
No, you suck, pal.
No, you know what? How about this? You fucking suck. Yeah. No. Anyway, go ahead. So I'm aware of what the match is. Tell me what happened.
So they had the first ever women's match. That's the first ever women's Money in the Bank match.
Which they explicitly sold as a historical moment for women. That's important.
So then they had a man take the briefcase down and hand it to a woman at the end. In
broad strokes. He's not so much a man as... I don't know if you're familiar with...
Wait, don't do that.
Rick and Morty. Let me finish. The episode where they go to the couples therapy, and Beth, the mother, is a giant space monster, and Jerry is a worm. That's basically what James Ellsworth, the guy who got the briefcase, is like a human worm. So I think that it was there. In other words, I think that they did fuck up by having it happen this way, but I don't think they thought of it because they don't project him as masculine in any way or feminine. He's just this amorphous blob. But there was a lot of kickback, or pushback, I should say. What resulted was this makeup match, basically. Do you think they did a good job at solving all of the problems in the history of WWE with representation of women, or? I
mean, I already said earlier that men and women are equal now in WWE.
Okay.
So. But no, I think the result was right. The match was not good. But
you didn't like it?
The match was okay. I mean, it doesn't help that this kind of match, they broke it up with commercials because they did it on regular TV, so that really screws with things, and they don't even do the picture-in-picture for main event matches. It was fine. It wasn't it's not a memorable Money in the Bank match, but I think by having Carmella win without James Ellsworth pulling down the briefcase,
and after almost winning when he did it again.
Yeah, at least this time, Becky knocked him off a ladder, big hog first into the ropes.
No little James Ellsworths running around, which thank God. So yeah, I think that was... like you said, it was an okay match. It wasn't anything to write home about, but I think they did a good job of having everything come out the way that they wanted to when they initially did the stupid booking. So I think it was a positive.
I don't know. Maybe. We'll see.
But there is a real positive, which is that we finally have officially, after talking about it last week, a Punjabi prison match.
Well, hold on. I just want to throw in one thing. It was great that Naomi just fucking murked Lana, by the way.
Oh, yeah. That was wonderful. That was really, really wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I just didn't want to let that get lost.
So, David.
Yes.
You have edited pieces of mine about wrestling, and one of them I remember distinctly working with you on was about a sumo wrestling match between monster trucks.
I think that's ringing some bells, although I guess it could also be... That seems like something I would dream as well. It's hard to know.
So, this isn't quite sumo wrestling monster trucks, but what a Punjabi prison match is it's a bamboo cage on the ring. And then there's another bigger bamboo cage outside of the ring, and the floor is lava.
The floor is not lava.
Yes, it is. You have to jump from one to the other, don't you?
The floor's not lava. I don't know.
I'm pretty sure it's lava. So, what I guess what I wanted to talk about is as someone who edits wrestling or has edited wrestling in the past, the absurdity, how much of it permeates your brain. That level of absurdity where you're just like, I almost am compelled to see this in the way that I'm compelled to see like a really grotesque medical condition.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the idea, the words Punjabi prison match has that kind of, that is I think a good example of the sort of thing that does sort of break through that. Like broadly, I think like, editing Ian Williams' stuff every week, which I haven't done for a little while, but like, I still read it every week. Like I have some sense of what the broader sort of storylines are and all that. But periodically there'll be stuff that wrestling fans know about and talk about as if it's a normal thing that everybody else would understand, that just to me is like the purest avant-garde language imaginable. And the concepts of it are just like, I mean, the idea of like what you described to me is like, that's a crazy thing. The part of it that is more crazy to me than the thing you described even is the fact that you could just say those words to Mark and he'd be like, Punjabi prison match, I see it. Like, I understand, I'm right there with you. Like, which is amazing to me, that there's like this whole other parallel universe where everybody speaks in weird code about shirtless guys like power bombing each other off of a like whatever bamboo rack.
So last week, Mark hinted at what the match might be without mentioning any words, Punjabi prison, anything. Just said they're coming out with what you think they might come out with, and I instantly knew that it was the Punjabi prison match.
That's amazing that you have rewired an otherwise functional brain. That like it goes right there, and you're not even wrong. Like you were right.
It's like, for me, as a wrestling fan who's also a big sports fan, I look at something like, I have trouble viewing things outside the context of wrestling. Like, the James Harden Chris Paul trade today seems like a wrestling storyline where, like, Chris Paul is going to turn heel on James Harden at some point. Do you try to apply your normal understanding of sports narratives to wrestling, or do you just assume the person writing knows about the nuances in such a way that you don't really have to worry about it, like they've got it, unless their copy doesn't make any sense to you?
It's funny, like there definitely were times with Ian where I would ask about stuff, just because like, it would be the sentences are very, they scan, they're in proper English, they just have like a few clear terms of art in them that just might as well be hieroglyphics to me. And like, so a lot of it is this like reading context, like the way that you would be sort of trying to, if someone was speaking a foreign language to you that you were like crappy at, like if someone were to speak Italian to me, like I got a C- in Italian 12 years ago. Like, but I remember some words, and so like basically if I can understand enough that like I know they're talking about ice cream, and I'm like, cool, I also, I like ice cream. Like, all the other words in the sentence could be wrong, and I could be very wrong in that way of doing it. So sometimes you have to ask. But I mean, I think the thing with wrestling narratives that is that's actually easier for me to understand than anything that I would have gleaned from reading years worth of wrestling articles is the fact that like broadly it seems like it's spilled over well out of wrestling to the point where like a great deal of the things that are happening news-wise, culturally, whatever, all have this kind of like wrestling valence to them. There's like that Jeremy Gordon piece about how like everything is wrestling now, which he wrote for the New York Times like a few years ago, and like every single day it seems more true to me. It's just like the bombast and the like what you were saying too, these ideas of like narratives and counter narratives that sort of like overwhelm the actual like events as they exist. Like that's not just a wrestling thing anymore. It's not even just a sports thing anymore.
It's amazing how much the concept of heels and faces has bled into like every aspect of my life. Mm-hmm. And like people who aren't into wrestling completely understand it. Or they might not even know like what the origins are. Like we had Charlotte Wilder on before WrestleMania, and she had never watched wrestling before ever and didn't know anything about it. So like we were trying to...
We're just sorry, Charlotte, by the way, for making you...
It's okay. She's watching Glow right now and she really likes it because she's like, wait, I understand all of this now. But even telling her, like, heel and face were wrestling terms just blew her mind. Because, like, she understands what those words mean.
Yeah, their usage is now, like, well outside of it. I think that's something that, just the general, like, the performativity is the academic word, and so I'm probably not using it right, but there's the way in which everything seems to have this element of like a public facing performance to it now, in terms of just like anything that you watch, that like element of artifice is like, yeah, I think wrestling fans were like well ahead of everyone else in terms of being able to like process a world that happens like that.
Well, because we spend so much time talking about it on the internet, like what's real and what's fake, and this idea of like piecing together narratives from what you've heard backstage, and also understanding how that relates to the narrative that you're seeing in public, which for like the Trump administration is the most like the craziest thing for me as a wrestling fan, is to be like, they have this story that they're treating as like, let's call it kayfabe, and then they have all of these leaks that are like, that's not actually what's happening backstage. Like that to me, and I mean, I literally wrote about this, so it may be like kind of a little on the nose, but like Trump is very much a wrestling heel in the sense that he understands that part of it is getting the crowd to hate you or the other person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's certainly that like that dedication, that like blank, like not immoral, but like like amoral dedication to like heat as an idea. You know, that just like constant interest, constantly like you have to get over no matter what it takes to do it. No matter how many like stupid fucking lies or bumps you have to take or whatever. Like that is, I mean, again, it's kind of damaging out of the wrestling context, but again, it does sort of prepare you for.
Rips asunder the fabric of our democracy, but other than
other than that, though, you can't say it doesn't work, except for that, except for the thing that you just said.
There was a great article at Paste that was basically about like socialist wrestling, like what if wrestling was socialist?
And I think, well, yeah, go ahead.
It's amazing how you realize like how much of this stuff is intertwined with real life, or easily understood through the lens of real life. And vice versa, how you can understand real life through the lens of wrestling. Just seeing something like that where you're like, how could wrestling be socialist? And it's like, oh, there's literally 1,500 words about how it could be that way, and I understand every one of them, and what's wrong with my brain.
Yeah. It's weird, though. That part of it, again, I've, Lord knows, edited more than a few such stories that are making that very comparison, and I'll tell you, it does not seem like a stretch to me. The idea of it as like sort of a popular theater that exists, you know, like in a much closer relationship to its audience than, you know, movies or episodic television or any of that other stuff does. That, like, you know, from there, it's like, obviously there's more than one way to be populist, but there's certainly a way in which that cuts left. Just, you know, even outside of the politics, just the style of it is such that it feels that way.
David?
Yes?
When The Rock and John Cena are the two candidates for president, who are you voting for?
I mean, what parties are they affiliated with here? Not to make this too partisan. I feel like The Rock is a Republican, right?
Yeah, he used to be a Republican. He's registered as an independent now. I do not know if that's because he was pushed from the Republicans. Because he doesn't like Trump,
Okay.
But I don't know if that makes him like an Arnold Schwarzenegger Republican, or if he's being an independent now because he's the biggest movie star in the world, and it's much easier for him to be in the middle.
Yeah, like the whatever Democrats buy shoes to, except for in this case it's pay-per-views and tickets to whatever the Magical Island 2, whatever it is he's up to. It's funny. Cena is one of those guys where I edited a piece by Nate Patron where like I've heard him rap like more than once. I have read about how bad he is, and I've read about how actually he's good. And whereas The Rock is the sort of thing where like I really actually have not read as much about him. I mean, I'm more familiar with him because I've never seen, I should say that I've never seen a Fast and Furious movie, any of them. But I have seen other Rock movies, more than enough. I would say I'd probably be inclined to vote for The Rock because I think he's more charismatic, but I'd really like to hear where they stand on the issues.
Well, John Cena is running on hustle, loyalty, and respect.
Mm-hmm.
While The Rock would probably run on casual misogyny and mild homophobia.
Well, no, if he runs as Dwayne Johnson.
Oh, if he runs as Dwayne Johnson, aspirational masculinity.
Masculinity. But if he runs as The Rock, he has to remind you constantly, he is straight, and he loves straight sex.
with girls and boobies. That's pretty much...
The Rock and Dwayne Johnson are very different people.
Literally couldn't be more different.
I remember when I was in college, this was like around the beginning, my senior year was around the beginning of The Rock's big breakthrough. And his book, like his like As Told To book or something came out around the same time as Mick Foley's book. And I and another guy on the college newspaper, he read the Rock book and I read the Mick Foley book, and we had a conversation about it. And I got done reading the Mick Foley one, and I was like, this guy actually is my dad now, and I'm gonna live with him, and he's gonna teach me how to be like him, and I can't wait to get started. And he, like, my buddy, hated the Rock's book. Like, it was just like, it's the most, like, beyond being like artless and stupid in the way that like you'd expect those books to be. He's like, this guy's a fucking turd. Like, and obviously, you know, like, I think now, like, that's a guy that I know has seen and enjoyed Fast and Furious movies, so I'm sure that he has at the very least revised his opinion somewhat. I mean, honestly, the answer to your question is that I would probably be out there knocking on doors for Mick Foley, whether he wanted to run or not. But
I need to know Mick Foley's opinion on healing via crystal. And
then... It's like he's right on, you know, like a lot of the social issues that matter to me, like healing via crystal. And he seems like a very nice man, though. Like and man, that book is really, I actually recommend it. I don't remember which one it is. It's like the Mankind book, but there's a lot of like really crazy stories in there that are just you know, no character stuff, which I guess was his character, was having no character, you know, at least as Mick Foley. But like, yeah, like kind of harrowing shit, honestly, for an innocent normie sports brain like mine. It's like, why would they use barbed wire for that? That's terrible. It's very dangerous.
Did he write about the explosives?
Yeah, I think he certainly wrote about the explosives and like the aftermath of the explosives.
And losing his ear and a bunch of crazy shit like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of like thumbtacks involved in one of these things. Yeah, the stuff that he... Yeah, it's kind of amazing that he came out... Honestly, like, if crystal healing is the weirdest thing he believes now after all those years of that, like, that is a miracle.
In and of itself.
Yeah, like, he should be, like, completely haunted, like, Klaus Kinski last act of a Werner Herzog movie, just, like, floating down a river to his doom on a raft. Like, that's... Honestly, that is the mentality that he should have after, like, all the extreme matches he did in Japan.
Yeah, I am... He's one of those guys where I'm very happy that he's, you know, still with us. Unlike, I mean, WWE won't let him wrestle anymore, which is great. And he tried after they let him go a while ago.
That's something that I, again, like from my outsider perspective of it, like there's definitely like when they were like Sting came back and stuff like that. And part of me is just like, these guys are 50 odd years old, man. Like, just don't. Like, I know people love him, but like somebody's got to stand up and tell this guy he doesn't need to get thrown through a table, right?
Well, what's weird is, like, Jerry Lawler, WWE won't let him wrestle anymore because he literally had a heart attack in the middle of the ring.
Is he pushing back against that?
Oh, he owns his own company, so he still wrestles. And he's like, he's in his 60s and he's like setting people on fire on weekends, just like, it's like a side hobby. I'm not even kidding. Like, that is a thing that Jerry Lawler does. He sets his opponents on fire. Lawler also...
Are they great balls of fire, Mark? That's the name of the next pay-per-view. And Jerry Lee Lewis and Jerry Lawler have the same lawyer, which is why that's the name of the pay-per-view.
Well, no, it was the name of the pay-per-view, and then Jerry Lee Lewis was pissed about it. So he got in touch with his lawyer.
That's why it's the theme song of the pay-per-view.
Great Balls of Fire. They use the Great Balls of Fire song, and they have to call it Great Balls of Fire pay-per-view on television every time. It's just,
every time. It's
this amazing, goofy fucking thing. And they're like, yeah, we're just going to keep using this branding in the future, too. We like it.
What's also fantastic about I mean, again, I guess there's some gross elements of it too, but something that I've always like admired about wrestling is the fact that like it still is like for all the money that it makes, like these guys are still just like carny dirtbags, like trading favors and like, you know, just like whatever, like pantsing each other for each other's amusement backstage and so like they're just like weird children like from
they're like theater kids. And because I have a friend who is a professional wrestler at the same company that, like, some of the current wrestlers in the WWE have come through. So, like, and you talk to those kids, and a lot of them are kids. They're in their mid-20s, early to mid-20s. They are just athletes who are also theater kids. Like, that is almost to a person the type of people you're dealing with, especially now. It used to be just like guys that blew out their knee and couldn't play football anymore. Now it's people who have wanted their entire life to become a professional wrestler and have watched every professional wrestling thing you've ever seen and read every book and happen to be pretty good athletes. That dynamic has changed a lot.
Yeah, there's actually something kind of funny about that too. I wonder how, I mean, you guys I'd be interested in hearing what you think about this, because like to go back to The Simpsons, I think that the decline of that show, which we're now like, I don't even know, I haven't watched it in 15 years probably.
20 years into the
decline. Yeah, I mean, seriously, it's ridiculous that you can say stuff like that, but it's like, yeah, it probably has been about that long. But that, like, I think the decline of it in part, I mean, it's just, the best writers leave because that's like how it is. But it started, at this point, it's like clearly being written by people that grew up wanting to write for The Simpsons. And I think that there's been like that element of like self-referentiality, or like you can get so wrapped up in that you sort of like forget to make jokes, that you're just kind of like constantly nodding at like the fan service element of it. And with wrestling, there's something about that too. The idea that like these guys are people that are doing it now are like ex-super fans who are constantly, sort of like winking at the audience and referencing, different things. And I'd imagine that can get in the way of the actual like delivery of goods.
Well, I think that they have, at least for the WWE, I can't, Mark would be able to speak better for other companies, but at least in the WWE, there's much more of like a controlled creative process that prevents them from doing too much inside baseball. But part of it is also like the wrestling that used to happen was kind of like watching stuff on like 8mm film, and now it's kind of like, oh, we have digital cameras and we can actually make this stuff look nice. Like the level of talent involved and the level of planning involved and the level of just development from like the Performance Center and NXT and on the indies to when you actually end up being a star that's on television is so much more involved that I think that they do a good job of avoiding most of the pitfalls involved with that, if not all of the pitfalls involved with that.
It's weird hearing you say, like, because it's obviously such a big thing, but I forget who tweeted it, but someone talked about how, and this ties into the Carney shit, like, all of the wrestling that we watch, essentially, like the most people watch, all of the weird decisions made are just, like, at the whim of two old dudes. Just two.
Yeah.
Like, all the fucking WWE shit, that if you love it or you hate it, it's just whatever Vince McMahon is feeling that day. And I think it's New Japan also, it's like, whatever their old dude is thinking that day. Like, that's all these decisions that affect the largest percentage of wrestling fans, worldwide.
It's frustrating with that. I mean, again, that's one of those things that kind of like scans as like a, sort of, if you want it to read in parallel to like the broader world in a depressing way, like you can absolutely do that. It's not even hard, like I'm not going to do it here because we're having fun podcast. But yeah, there's something about that is kind of like that stifling of the broader creativity of it. It's frustrating too, because that's the other thing that I have gathered from reading this stuff, and then even from whatever, you got to watch videos to embed in the pieces. So that's like how I see most of the wrestling that I see, and like those. I mean, it really is remarkably like sophisticated in terms of the performance quality and the the physicality of it relative to the stuff that I grew up watching, which really was just like kind of like soft fat guys like screaming. And then they're like oiled up, and then they just kind of like flop around on each other. Like it's so like I'm going to say his name wrong, but like Finn Balor.
You got it.
Like that guy is like, I don't, just from somebody who's like, again, I've had to like embed some videos. Like that is the stuff that he does is crazy. The stuff that like AJ Styles does is fucking crazy relative to the stuff that I saw when I was a kid. Like they're not, except for the fact that the same people are enriched by them damaging their bodies while they're doing it. It's like it is effectively something entirely different to me. The most unschooled eye imaginable. But it's just like,
as a wrestling fan, even my dad watching, I watch with him a decent amount. Him just like seeing guys like AJ Styles and his initial reaction just being like, who is this guy? Because he grew up with guys that were 6'5" and 280 pounds and were just kind of lying on each other, like you said. To see someone like AJ Styles like blew his mind for the first time. Like, what is this guy doing? I've never seen wrestling like this before, and I've been watching it for 50 years.
And now you've got the 6'5", 280-pound guys can also climb to the top rope and spin around, 450 degrees for some reason.
Yeah, it's like the LeBron thing that, like, and sooner or later, I imagine you just sort of get used to it in the same way that, like, the fact that LeBron James is physically the same size as Karl Malone, which is an insane thing to, and yet, like, he plays the way he plays.
Former wrestler Karl Malone.
WWE legend. Or at least I think he wore a hat in the ring and, like, wanted to actually wrestle, right?
Karl Malone and Dennis Rodman, both in WCW.
Dennis Rodman still has a broken character. Like, he's, like, basically got stuck in a promo.
That dude like worked himself into a shoot.
It's worked his whole life. It's a fucking work shoot. Ugh. Yeah,
but actually, I will say this about Dennis Rodman. Actually, if he would have trained, probably been, and Karl Malone too, both would have been good wrestlers.
I mean, he was tag team partners with Hulk Hogan, which made Dennis Rodman the best wrestler on that team.
Second best plaintiff, though.
Yeah, arguably the best person on the team.
That's gonna suck when we get sued for that line.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's gonna be terrible. He's gonna show us pictures of his. Never mind.
Where's that pizza, brother?
Joke about pythons, but it just
oh god, old sad pythons.
Talking about his dick.
Thanks. I didn't know you meant dick when you said python, but that clears it up.
You guys talking about dicks?
Sure are.
All right, cool. I'm in.
Yeah, it's the same show every week. This is actually, that's what Rudo means in Spanish. Mark, you said you wanted to talk to him, Dave, about something, and now it totally escapes me. The fashion police.
Oh my god, David.
Which is along the same lines of what you're talking about, in terms of a thing that they're producing that is extraordinarily self-referential, but totally works because it's done in a way that it works on multiple levels. So basically, Mark, you might be better at explaining.
So, started out, it was the Fashion Files, and there's this team. It's Tyler Breeze and Fandango.
He's a male model. He's basically Zoolander.
Yeah. And Fandango is just like a dancer. He looks like he just came from Chippendales and all that. These two guys are like serious comedians. They're real funny. Their delivery is amazing. And they decided that they were going to form a police squad that, arrested people for crimes of fashion.
In wrestling, which happens a lot. There are a lot of fanny packs.
And this is a part of the average broadcast?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, they're on like the Tuesday show, and so they have these little like 3 to 5 minute like mini episodes of them. They're just pre-taped things, and they're skits, and like each one is the best. It would have been the best sketch on Saturday Night Live that week, essentially.
Wow.
But they started out doing like Law and Order parodies where they had the music and like zooming in on the the police station and all that, and then they went to like a noir detective kind of vibe, and they put them in black and white, and everyone was very aware of being in black and white. So like when new people walked in on screen, they're like, "Wait, black and white now? What's going on?" There's a lot of fourth wall breaking, and now they're doing Fashion Vice.
And this is the thing that they're like allowed to do. Like nobody in the whoever, I'm assuming that like the McMahons or whoever are in charge of this, they're just sort of like they don't get it, but they're like, whatever, knock yourselves out. Like you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, they're like, okay, this is insane, but we don't understand any of it. But people seem to be responding positively, so keep doing it.
Yeah, so like when you talk about like creatively being stifled, I think that is true to a certain extent with someone like an underdog type of character who wants to be in the main event. But in terms of guys who like are in the mid card or who are trying to like establish themselves in some way, they are allowed to, if it catches on, do a lot more stuff. And at least for the Fashion Files, what's particularly interesting is the just piles of inside jokes that they have on the show all of the time. Just there'll be like exchanges where they're doing Michael Jackson song names. There's stuff where like they have these, like the murder boards on a castle or something like that. Mm-hmm. They'll have pictures of like Sami Zayn, and it will say generic under it. And Sami Zayn used to be a wrestler whose name was El Generico. Like they
and
do.
He wore a mask.
and he wore a mask, and they're like, there's all of these kind of jokes. If you like stop and look at the board, it's like this giant pile of Inside Wrestling jokes, but it also works as just like a parody of these two. It's like if Zoolander got mixed up with Miami Vice, like, and happened on a wrestling show. Does that make sense? Like, that's the kind of stuff they're doing.
Makes sense isn't the word I would use necessarily to describe what you just described, but yeah, like, I'm getting it.
And you can kind of tell based on the level of jokes and how often they hit, that, like, the regular writers aren't the ones doing all of this. Like, they might be helping to a degree, but it's clearly, like, these guys putting it together. They already had a project where, you might have seen this. They did Southpaw Regional Wrestling, and it was just, like, a short YouTube series. It was, like, 3 videos, maybe 4. And they pretended to be, like, a failing wrestling promotion in 1987, trying to like promote their last show. What was it? Lethal Leap Year, I think. Except 1987 doesn't have a leap day on it, and they scheduled it for that day, so like the whole thing killed the company. But it's just these characters that these guys do backstage.
Way more like Spinal Tappy joke than I was expecting from this.
It's the most Spinal Tap, but not in a way that's like over. They're just doing a Spinal Tap parody. It's like just a pitch perfect, really shitty. Like if you watch Smoky Mountain Wrestling and you were to watch Southpaw Regional Wrestling, it would be the same thing. But Smoky Mountain Wrestling was a totally real thing that happened in the early '90s. Like,
so they let these guys do like just a bunch of the wrestlers. Like let them be these characters that they already had like created in their head. These weird 1980s style characters. And WWE's only interference with it was essentially they were like, let's call someone to sponsor it, and so we can make money off of it. And so they
made it like a KFC commercial.
Yeah, so there's like a bumper for it with a commercial where Ric Flair is doing a voiceover, inviting people to come to the local KFC so that they can meet the wrestlers of Southpaw Regional Wrestling and also have like the Georgia Gold chicken or whatever.
And that's it. Like, but it's them. If they can make money doing something, I will say this about the WWE, and even if it's funny, they will do it just to make money. They are money first, whatever second. But they understand that part of making money is allowing creative people to do creative things.
And they're so dedicated to money that they will like basically take a completely like null set approach to that and just be like, whatever, man. If it works, like it makes money, therefore it is good. Like, so it doesn't matter how weird it is or how...
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if it has the effect of, like, freeing people to do weird stuff, then I guess it's kind of hard to say that it, is bad.
Yeah, there's, like, a lot of different complaints about Vince McMahon and how, like, stifling he is creatively. But like Nick said, it's a lot of people saying, like, oh, I should be here on the card. That's really where he stops people. But you also hear a lot of stories about if you go to Vince with an idea, he will listen to it. Like, you just have to sell him on it. It's like anything else.
So how is it that guys wind up getting, like, exiled, though? Like, good wrestlers wind up, like, sort of either, like, because this was something I remember reading about that Ian had written about, like, guys that sort of, like, fell off the pace. I guess, or, like, AJ Styles, I think, was one of those guys where it just, like, it didn't happen for him in the promotion. And then he like went abroad and went, whatever to one of the other promotions and like was recognized as like the greatest wrestler alive. But it was like somehow when he was with WWE, it didn't pop for him.
Yeah. So like at least with AJ Styles, he was a small guy. He is a small guy, or he's an average sized human being. He's not some sort of like Grecian monstrosity.
Which is still Vince's preference, yeah, right? That he just likes.
He is much more look blind than he used to. Like, aesthetically, he's just whatever gets over is much more the case now than it was even, like, 2 or 3 years ago. Because of Daniel Bryan, very specifically. It was like, oh my god, whatever gets over, gets over. He just knows it's much easier for a guy who's 6'4" to get over. So what happened with a guy like AJ Styles is they try out, because AJ Styles, I don't think made it. He was very briefly in WWE. They had a very specific idea of what they wanted a performer to be that was going to be a main event guy. But WWE has a history of, if you go abroad and make yourself into a star, they will bring you back for more money than you ever would have made beforehand, because you've proven yourself somewhere else, and it's not the WWE, but it proves that you yourself, because the WWE has a tendency to think it makes stars. So if you're already a star, they will just strap a rocket to you if you do a good job when you first come in. Like AJ Styles came in and had a good match every single night he was on the card. So like they will give you the benefit of the doubt if you're successful somewhere else, but it was harder, especially back then, to work your way up into any type of, there was no path. Now you can work at NXT in the Performance Center and build your way to being a main event guy. But in the past, it was just like you had to hope somebody got hurt to be able to like move up on the card.
And the time AJ was looking for WWE was right when WCW folded after WWE bought it. So they had way more wrestlers than they had space for them.
Yeah,
which is how an entire new company was able to form out of the ashes of WCW, because it was like, okay, all you guys can have jobs again.
Yeah,
and they called it TNA.
Oh, right. I knew that's what it was, right? Total nonstop action.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now they're Impact Wrestling, because it's not
it's not
2001.
Yeah. Yeah, I always enjoyed that those were like, there's still some sense in which there's that like turn of the millennium like vibe to it, with a lot of like X's on things. Like that's still like wrestling is still kind of trapped in that. Like,
well, and wrestling is like this weird nostalgia factory that like constantly does lithographs of the stuff it's done, but with like slight tweaks to be like, oh, it's an original painting. Like, that's the best way I can describe some of the stuff WWE does. So like the Hardy Boys came back recently, and the Hardy Boys are literally just what they were 15 years ago, because that's what makes money.
They also still have a Z at the end of their name.
Yeah, no, I know. Believe me, I've freaking read a good amount about those guys. Their whole thing is that they were always crazy, but now they're not on drugs anymore. And so they're like a little more in command of the narrative. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a very excellent way to put it.
That reading about the, like the brother versus brother pay-per-view thing that they did, like that was one of the most
final deletion.
Yeah, like reading just like a recap of it, like that we ran at the Classical, it was like 100% the like every bit of the sensation that you get being on drugs, except for like I was at work. It was 100% the same thing where you're just sort of like, and then he's like riding a riding mower around, and then the other guy's in a cape, and he's upset. Like just like.
Did you get to the part about the drones?
Yeah, I mean, it was just.
Drones.
I just let it. At some point, I just let it like wash over me. I'm not gonna be able to figure it out. I'm just gonna make sure that like all the semicolons are in the right place, and I'm gonna run this fucker right up there. It's like, what else are you gonna do? But it was cool. I mean, that's like it's like watching a foreign film with the subtitles off. You know, just kind of following the action.
Is there anything other than the sheer commitment that prevents you from ever... It seems like you don't have any particular interest in watching, not in a bad way, but in like you're almost like the interaction you have with it now, and do you feel like it would be ruined if you got more into it?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. It might be. I think that like I find it interesting now, and I do feel like it's a commitment of time, I think, is mostly what it is. That like I feel like my cards, and it's significant, right? Yeah, right.
Oh, it's 5 hours a week, not including pay-per-views, and not including pay-per-view weeks that are also takeover weeks, because then it's 5 plus another. It's 10 hours of wrestling in 4 days.
And you're tweeting the whole time, and then you got to talk about it with people after. It's just like, I mean, honestly, it's all I can do to. I mean, the Mets are a challenge for a bunch of reasons, but like, 5 of those games a week is like, I feel like honestly, I need to lie down after like the. But yeah, I mean, it is interesting because like there is certainly enough interest in, on my end in terms just from reading about it to make me want, especially when people seem like they're excited about things. Like if I didn't have to pay for it, like the final deletion, seeing how pumped otherwise reasonable adults were about this completely insane thing. There was definitely a part of me that wanted to experience it for myself. But like, I've also felt that way about like LSD. And at some point, you're just, you're a man in your late 30s. You got commitments. I'm sure I'd be fine But yeah, I don't really have 5 hours to dedicate to like hearing colors during the week.
David, we have to get you to a show at some point. Just do that.
I think that's probably something that'll happen. I mean, like, I know that Ian used to talk about that when I was editing him. He was like, "You are so close, man." He's like, "I'm just trying to write the column that makes you break down and watch like an actual show." And I feel like, you know, we almost got there, and then I was sort of started doing more writing and less editing, and I was saved from that fate.
Well, my friend Mark Masick once was like, we would always talk about wrestling on GChat. And it used to be like I would compare things to wrestling, and he'd be like, "Oh my god, I never thought about it that way." But he never really watched, and then he started watching, and now he's like I mean this in the sweetest way possible, like a junkie. Like I'll try to talk to him about like, "Oh, have you watched it?" He's like, "I only care about wrestling now. I can't." I just need my fix of Elias Sampson.
Which is, I mean, whatever gets you through. Life is hard, you know. Like if that's what it takes, then that's what it takes.
Oh, and I think you talked about like relatively normal adults freaking out, or not freaking out, but like being pumped in a way that like is almost childlike, I guess. For me, that's what it felt like when something exciting in wrestling happens. You feel like a kid. You're like, "Oh my god, I have to show people this. I'm just so excited."
Yeah, you wrote a wonderful thing about that for the Classical some time back about going to WrestleMania.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things you wrote. And that it's definitely, I mean, I think that's like a broadly a true feeling in any sports experience that works, right? I mean, that just the first experience you have of this stuff when it really hits you and makes you want more of it generally tends to be when you're a kid. And then as you get older and feel older and more stressed, anything that can jog you back to that particular uncomplicated feeling is, I mean, this is why I don't judge most people's, you know, whatever sports kinks or entertainment kicks or whatever, for the most part, as long as it's not hurting anybody. It's, like I said, like life is fucking hard, man. Like if anything that makes you feel that way reliably, like to feel happy in that uncomplicated way, like if it works for you, it works for you. I could not be more like adamant about that.
Yeah, and I think Mark and I don't know how Mark feels, but for me, wrestling is a safe space. It's kind of like something I have every week that I can just enjoy, that I know the ins and outs of, but it's there for me to watch when I watch. Like, it's just a nice thing to have. Like, do you feel the same way, Mark?
That's why it's so infuriating if it doesn't go well. Or if you watch for 3 hours and you're like, "Oh my god, that episode was so bad. This was supposed to be my happy time." Right.
That's I mean, and that goes back to the stuff that you were saying before too, about the idea of like one or two old guys like calling all the shots on this stuff, where it's like, you know, you spend your whole day reckoning with that sort of shit most of the time. Like, nothing against the people that run either of our companies or whatever, who in both cases, you know, I've worked for both, fine guys. It's just, you know, at some point that's the world that we live in. Like, the more that your escapism reminds you of what it is you're trying to escape, like, then it is failing, and it is failing you. And it's, yeah, I certainly understand being upset about that.
Yeah, and that's why I think the money in the bank thing we talked about at the beginning of the episode was such like a big deal, because it was like, we've trusted you we've given you the trust that we never should have given you about the women's division, which for a very long time you made, where it was just like this misogynist shit twister. Is that a fair assessment of it, Mark?
I mean, dude, you know, roll with it, go.
Yeah. So, and I think what happened was you promised us you'd never be that person again. And the WWE was that person again, if even for a fleeting moment, or it felt like that's what they were doing. It was almost like they fell off the wagon, and it was really disappointing to a lot of people to watch that happen in a way that you can see it every 6 months or so. There's this big explosion of just like, you promised us this thing and then took it away from us in a way that breaks the social contract that we've agreed on, that you're allowed to pull certain things out from under me, but not this.
Mm-hmm. But then there's the other side of it where, man, like, you get your Daniel Bryan moment at WrestleMania 30, where he wins 2 matches at WrestleMania, and one of them's against the guy who runs the company, and the other one is for the world title. And everyone just loses their minds with joy, like just collective joy. I mean, it's like a team winning the World Series after, you know, you follow them so long, and it's not always great, but like you stuck with it. And there's like Bayley winning, at NXT TakeOver, the first huge show they did at Brooklyn, like sold out arena for their minor league place. You know, it's like a minor league team going to Yankee Stadium and selling it out and then just winning this huge event. And man, just like my baby who is in the other room crying right now.
You sound upset. Is there something wrong?
But no, like those moments move you to tears.
Yeah. So, oh my gosh, excellent.
It was wonderful timing.
Yeah.
That's what I was working toward. I hope my baby's okay.
Yeah, do you need to check on your baby?
Yeah, give me 1 second.
All right.
I'm holding a baby right now.
Oh, so. Cool. She sounds much quieter and happier.
Yeah. Yeah, gave her a pass. She's trying to pull my headphones off, but you know.
Rude.
She loves wrestling. I'll tell you that. It's the bright colors and the sounds, so...
and that, I think, actually is a perspective that you can carry through for the entirety of your days.
It's time-tested.
Yeah.
Before we went, we wanted to talk about, along these same lines, what's it like when something happens in wrestling and you realize you follow almost all of wrestling Twitter?
Oh my gosh. And not even for the fact that they're on wrestling Twitter? It's incredible.
They're like also on baseball and basketball Twitter.
There's something kind of cool about it just experientially, because I don't use like TweetDeck filters or any of this stuff. Like I follow a lot of people, and when I'm looking at my timeline, it's just like choosing to step in front of a fire hose. But like, so I'm in it for the cascade, man. And you can definitely tell when something's happening, but it has that kind of like, again, it's all a matter of context cues. You know, and sometimes it's really not very helpful because it's just, you know, a million people being like, no way! Like, and other people being like, fuck you, seriously? And I don't, you know, that could be anything. Like, was there, like, you can generally tell it's wrestling because of it's, you know, the thing, there's people that spend most of their time writing about, like, macroeconomics or suddenly cursing. But there's something kind of fun about that, about the detective work. We're trying to figure out what it is.
Even as a wrestling fan, you'll be like, what happened? I stepped out of the room. Did someone die?
There's so many times I wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh, New Japan must be on. Because it's 7 o'clock in the morning and people are like screaming in all caps.
Yeah, that is pretty crazy. It's more so too than, you know, any of the other sports that people tend to feel moved to tweet during. You know, like basketball Twitter is, you know, everybody's watching the same thing, and certainly by the end of the year, everybody's watching the same game, you know, which is really similar to what you get from wrestling, and just the dynamic of it is so different. Because there's this combination of that, you know, whatever, like shrieking, all caps, fanboying, like marking out, I believe is the term that you would use for it. And then also there's that like analysis in real time from people that are never serious about anything. You know, like people that are like professional comedians that are out there mostly like tweeting jokes and like trying to get like Gene Simmons to block them. And then suddenly they're like, I don't actually think that writing really did any of the wrestlers any favors.
So true.
Yeah, like which is crazy. But again, at the same time, it's a testament to the power of it. If it makes people that, you know, like otherwise are constantly tweeting, you know, love to whatever, fill in the blank, like to suddenly sober up and get like real serious about something, then it's clearly there's something powerful at work there.
I love the parts of Twitter that still don't realize what day wrestling is on, usually. Mm-hmm. So like there'll be a pay-per-view on a Sunday, and then on a Monday they're like, there's fucking wrestling on again? I'm like, yeah, every Monday for the last 30 years.
Yeah. Yeah, you do not get the right to complain about it, honestly. Like, this is the thing about it, too. I mean, there's definitely, you know, on balance, I like Twitter very much, although I know that it's bad for me and insanely stupid, and definitely has damaged my brain and socialized, just broader, my social skills.
That's fun to lie.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's nothing there, and I don't think it's just me either, although maybe it's especially me.
Sad exclamation point.
Yeah, but I do think that the idea of, like, getting mad that the people you follow are tweeting about wrestling is, you know, like, then you should close the tab. You know, like, this is, they're there for, you know, whatever, you in for a penny, in for a pound. Like, if you like the stupid jokes or macroeconomics, then, like, you have to deal with the fact that they also are, you know, whatever, going to get very excited whenever Daniel Bryan shows up on their TVs.
I lost a lot of followers when I left Over the Monster. Because I was just like, they didn't unfollow me until I said I was going to spend that time writing about wrestling. Mm-hmm. And then I lost, I don't know, just immediately like dozens of people.
Yeah.
Fuck this.
Because I feel like there's something, like, in some ways, like, wrestling is more, than any time in my life that I can remember, that it is more mainstream and more sort of normalized. And yet at the same time, like, yeah, I mean, if you're in it for the Xander Bogaerts takes and then you just suddenly those have been replaced one for one with wrestling shit, then yeah, like that would be an issue for some people. I can see that.
Those hot Bogaerts takes.
Got to get the Bogaerts. I need it.
So I think this is as good as time as any to mosey on down the road, especially because the next question I'm going to ask is, Mark, where can they find you on the internet?
They can find me on Twitter, which we were just talking about. How about that?
Nice.
Hey.
It's almost like I planned it that way.
Super
Poorly, but I planned it.
I'll buy that. They can find me on Twitter at Mark_Normandin. That is Mark with a C. You can find my wrestling writing at CagesideSeats.com. Around pay-per-view times, which the next one is Great Balls of Fire.
And it's not Sunday.
The logo looks like a dick.
Mark, it doesn't look like a dick. It is a dick.
They like Photoshop. They adjusted the logo ever so slightly, so there's like less dick protrusion at the edges at the end of it, but the balls are still clearly there, and they are very much on fire.
Less dick protrusion, but still enough dick protrusion.
Yeah. So you know there are balls. You're just not quite as sure about the dick anymore.
Yeah, they're playing just the tip, but with the logo.
So anyway, when that's happening, you can find more wrestling writing at sbnation.com/wrestling, which is pretty convenient and easy to remember, I guess.
And David, where can they find you?
I'm on Twitter as well, as discussed earlier, at David_J_Roth. And you can find my writing at Vice Sports, sports.vice.com.
And you can check me out on Twitter at the Nixter. That is TheN1CKSTER. And Asuka, I will be the last woman standing after tonight. So good luck with all that. Oh, she's gonna murk me. It's not gonna be pretty. She's gonna kick my head off. So you can check us out on SoundCloud.com/Rudo Radio. That's RUDORADIO. You can also rate, review, and subscribe to us on iTunes. For those of you who do not have a review that you can think of, I believe our guest has one. David, do you have a review? Something.
It was tangy.
It was tangy. Is that like copyright tangy or just the taste?
The taste. It had notes of tang.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, thank you for asking.
And I guess if there's nothing left to say, the only thing left to say is bye.
Thanks.